Worship ran a little long, but not too long. No? Did I land the plane right on time? Good. Thank you. We're glad to have Kem back with us. Most of you know Kem or have seen buildings that he has designed and have been in them, and gratefully so. He has a new book, Netherland, which sounds suspiciously like Michael Jackson's place, but it's not. Yes, no. High School Temptation, Insurance Haze, Stolen Resolution, and Murder. What's not to like about that?
It's a non-fiction story that I wrote about a guy that I went to high school with in Murfreesboro. I grew up in Murfreesboro. We were never friends. This guy was kind of a bully. But when he had some interchanges in high school, hustling and everything, always over a girl.
Not named Debbie, by any chance.
No, but she's in the book.
Okay.
Debbie Taylor Taven. Since I grew up in Murfreesboro, that's somebody I know. Debbie Taylor Taven, Bill Taven, are very close friends. Anyway, he was murdered 11 years ago. This guy, 11 years ago, was murdered in Iowa. And I went to his funeral, really probably more out of kind of fascination, because he was not a good guy in Murfreesboro. And then some weird things happened. And I thought back right now, what did this guy do? And why was he killed? It's an unsolved murder, but it's all true.
Well, maybe we ought to have the book club take a look at that and bring you back to teach on that. All right. Nether, Nether, Netherland. As I said, most of you know Kem. Kem is a layman over at Belmead Methodist and has long taught adult Sunday school over there. And a number of years ago, his friend Debbie Tate said, I've got this friend who teaches Sunday school. Could he come and teach here? And I said, verily, yes, we would love that. And he's been doing that since. So last time he taught about Egypt, and we were over in Egypt about a month apart, I think, less than a month apart. So that was really kind of fun a year ago. Welcome. We are so glad you were here. Do you want to put this on, or? Good. Good to go. Is that an Escher tie?
We'll have to keep up. It's hard to keep up with Guy. Isn't that true? By the way, let's give a round of applause to Eric. Eric is the reason. Eric's the most important guy in the room, because if my PowerPoint doesn't work, I die.
Exactly.
Okay, so where is the original Bible? Okay, I've got a lot to show, so I'm going to really hurry through. And if I'm run late or whatever, you have to get up and you leave, whatever. I've taken Boy Scout groups to the National Archives, right? You've all been there. Why do you go? You go there to see one thing, and what is that? The Declaration of Independence. So I kept thinking, where is the original Bible? Where is it? Well, we're going to explore that. We're going to talk a little bit about how the Bible kind of came together. I'm not an expert on this at all, but talk a little bit about kind of my fascination of how it came together, how the Old Testament and the New Testament came together, and then where are the really kind of the really old ones? What do they look like? Disclaimer. People argue, historians argue. You know, who's got it correct? No, that's wrong. This is wrong. And the wonderful thing is research continues, and I'm going to share with you a very recent discovery that I didn't know about. That's pretty fascinating. Now, if you're a Bible scholar, or and that applies to Guy back here, I appreciate any corrections. Do them privately, please, as opposed to, no, that's wrong. Okay, who wrote the Bible? Well, it depends. And this book I found, but it's only about the Old Testament. So there are many books that really talk about where does the Bible come from? How is it put together? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Old Testament and then the New Testament. When I look through a regular Bible sometimes, and if the preacher is no good or the sermon's no good, you know, I look through the Bible and I look at the bottom of a page of Scripture, and sometimes there's these little notes, like these little letters, and particularly one near the next to the tube on the bottom, Targum. Well, what does that mean? What does Targum mean? And it says Vulgate. vulgar? What does that mean? Well, these are references to the scripture, and it's like, well, why are they there? Maybe I'll explain that. Of course, we're familiar with Torah, scrolls, the Old Testament. The first 5 books of the Old Testament, most of you know, the Torah, there's a word called the Tanakh, and that is because of the first 5 books, which are called the Torah, and then the second group, which are the prophets, and then the writings. So from T-A and N-A and K-H, we get the word Tanakh, and that's the Old Testament. And when I went one afternoon, I went over to the temple on Harding Road, the one across, I think it's called the Temple. You know, the 3 Jewish places along here, and the one right across from Belmead Methodist. I walked in one day and said, you know, I'm Methodist. And of course, the lady at the bookstore, the Jewish thing, goes, "Oh, really? Why are you here?" "Well, I want to buy your Bible." She said, "Well, it's the correct one." So here's a copy of it, and there it is, Tanakh. Okay. So, who wrote the Old Testament? Well, the kind of word is that Moses may have written it. But a lot of things, no, that isn't possible. Moses, you know, he didn't write it. But actually, he could have written it, and I'll show you why. Old Testament is really in 2 languages. Hebrew, and of course, Hebrew and the scrolls are considered sacred. You know, you're supposed to deal with them as they're very sacred. But the language that was kind of used was Aramaic. If you look at the 2 languages, and they're similar, but they're different enough, and the writing is that, you know, this is confusing enough. And this really starts with the whole issue of what Bible is correct. It's like, well, which translation? And, you know, if I'm looking at both of these, I don't have a clue. And someone really smart has to look at these and figure out what's the translation into different languages. And of course, eventually, another language shows up in the Middle East called Arabic. And that's, of course, the language that we deal with when we see about the Middle East when I was in Egypt and everything. Yes?
And the middle language, Nabatean, those are the folks who are down in Petra.
That's right.
Of the Nabatean kingdom.
That's right. And so where the languages were spoken and how they were, and what was even written down, and here's a zone, like this is a map. I'm not exactly sure what time period this is, but Aramaic was the language spoken where Jesus was, in that part of the world. And then further south, you get to Arabic. And then these things happen, but of course, these are languages that the local people speak. Now, Arabic, someone needs to have a Bible that they can read in Arabic, and so the scrolls needed to be, particularly when the Jewish folks came back from the exile in Babylonia, they come back. They've got to have a translation. Not everybody can read Hebrew, and even it's kind of sacred to even touch things that are written in Hebrew, so they come up with something called the Targum. What's the Targum? Well, it's simply a translation of the Old Testament from Hebrew into Aramaic. It's going to get confusing with this. Hold with me, because I'm confused just looking at the different languages. But after Alexander the Great shows up, you know, he shows up and conquers everything, and basically he says, look, from here on out, it's one language. Just get used to it. It's going to be the language, and it's going to be called Greek. Obviously, it's Greek. And of course, this is a language that was developed in Europe, in that area, taken down into this part of the world, whereas Hebrew and Aramaic were those were the languages that kind of the people developed over time. So you have the invaders show up with Greek, but most people are still speaking in Aramaic. Now, this becomes a problem because people can't understand each other's books. And you have some smart people come along, like King Ptolemy II. He's ruling in Alexandria. And basically, the official language is Greek. He knows that. Okay, we're Greek. We're getting along with that's the language of the modern world. But they are starting to collect documents in what was the Library of Alexandria, which was, you know, so sad that it's gone, but because so many items, so many translations, and so many documents were kept there. There's evidence that there were maybe 400 scrolls like you saw. And it was an incredible place, unfortunately, because we have Julius Caesar to thank for this. There's a fire and it destroys the library, which is probably the greatest loss in human information about human history that's ever occurred. Now, but Ptolemy is like, well, we've got to have something that the Greek world can read, that these Hebrew folks consider so sacred and everything. We've got to get a translation. And it's very smart. There are 12 tribes of the Jewish folks, or 12 tribes. So he sort of helps pick out, and I'm not sure exactly who does this, but they pick six scholars from the 12 tribes. So they have 72 folks, and basically they're going to go into chambers and translate the Bible, and then they're going to compare it. And so it's like 70, well, it's really 72, but it's 70 folks that are going to study the Old Testament and translate it into Greek, which they do. And that translation, the 70, is called the Septuagint. Is that how it's pronounced, Guy? Septuagint? Well, you've seen that word, and I've seen that word, in translations, and that's one of those little words that appear down at the bottom thing. That's what that is. It's a translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. Now, and we're still talking about the Old Testament, by the way, and the Greek version. And of course, the Greek version is a little different than the Hebrew version. What's in the right order? People get all mad, and that's wrong. But then along comes Jesus, and so now we have a brand new story. The focus, obviously, of Jesus is Jerusalem, and Guy and I have both been there. If you have not gone to Jerusalem, please take time and go, because it's an incredible place. Jesus may have spoken in the Bible. He speaks at the temple, and this may have been what the temple really was. I've got a slideshow on that. Some of you have seen. It's about the Temple Mount, and if it still existed today, the temple itself would be, one of the wonders of the world. It was the tallest building in this part of the world, 100 feet tall, huge courtyards around it, documented by different historians, and Jesus probably spoke here, and that's, he got really mad at the money changers because, they were doing bad things. Of course, Jesus is sentenced to death, and he's crucified, and he may have been crucified. They don't really know. These two pictures, the temple above is showing the temple from the Mount of Olives, which is a hillside that's directly east of the temple. If you look at the temple itself, the box building, the entrance there is facing directly east because it's facing the rising sun. And that's the temple. Now, the one on the bottom is from the other direction. It's from the west side of the temple. And the long wall that you see there on the bottom image, the long wall, that is the Western Wall, which is the place that is most sacred to Jewish folks now. A section of it is there, and that's where they pray. And they pray for the return of the original temple. Jesus may have been crucified very close by on a little hillside called Golgotha. I really don't know. That's a completely different story. I'll come back and share that with you sometime. But the New Testament, of course, shows up, and you've got the official language of the day, Greek, and then you have Aramaic. How does the Bible come together? Jesus is crucified. These guys are meeting. They're discussing, what are we going to do? How are we going to get this thing written? What's the best collection? And of course, there's so much disagreement over that there's not one gospel, there are four. And that alone makes things very complicated. Why not one official story? And why they do it this way, and that they have 4 different Bibles, 4 different Gospels, that's decided much later. But after Jesus is crucified, there's the Christians are there, and persecution begins, particularly from the Romans and for the Hebrews and the Jews that don't like the story. Like, that's not a good. We don't believe in Jesus. Stop that. Of course, there's a fire in Rome. Nero considers that it has a lot to do with the Christians. He blames everybody, and then there's terrible persecution of the Christians. And this is, only not that many years after Jesus dies, and he has his revenge. The Romans show up, are occupying Jerusalem anyway, but the Hebrews and the Jewish folks there hate the Romans. They just hate the Romans, and the Roman soldiers hate. Because they're constantly killing off individual Roman soldiers, throwing oil on them, hot oil on them and everything. And so the Romans just finally decide under Titus, we're going to fix this. We're going to destroy your temple, and which they do. They're 2 really sad days in Jewish history, and the first is when the first temple was destroyed, and then when this happens, which was either the second or third temple, depending on which source you look at. But it was a terrible day, and of course the Jewish folks are scattered, and that's called the diaspora of the Jewish folks. They go and they just go different places because the Romans have tried to kill everybody in Jerusalem, and the Romans are, they're in charge. The Romans have a historian who's Josephus, and he is documenting these things and, horrific stories, but he documents a lot of what happens, particularly the destruction of the temple. And he actually mentions Jesus in his history. These are 2 pages out of a book. My mom, when my mom died, I inherited many books that she had, and this book from the 1850s shows Josephus. Now, he looks more like an Arab with that outfit on. He doesn't look like, I don't think of him as a Jewish, but he's the guy that wrote these incredible and very detailed stories of what happened with the destruction of the temple and just why that happened, why Titus just decided, and his troops decided to destroy the temple and run everybody off. But who wrote the New Testament? Well, you've got the different sources. They're remembering things. They're writing things down. They're trying to get together a story. It's very complicated. The letters of Paul are appearing, but which ones are correct? Which ones are we going to use? You have the 12 apostles. You have evangelists. You have the disciples that are followers. You have kind of the 12, main characters. And putting together these 4 separate stories about Jesus, very difficult. It depends on people's memory and who's writing down things. And the bottom line is they're writing things down, but none of the originals exist to our knowledge. Everything we see is a copy. It's a copy that was made on papyrus or parchment or vellum, probably in Greek. Now, there's a final, really, persecution of the Christians by Diocletian, and this is a really terrible time because he's trying to wipe out Christianity totally. This is in 303 A.D., and it's like, we're going to get rid of all you Christians, and it isn't going to go good, and that's it. And Eusebius is writing this down, and he's documenting in his terrible time. But up shows Emperor Constantine. Constantine is a military officer. He is incredibly bright. He's very ambitious. He is deciding he's going to attack Rome and become the new emperor. And at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which is on October 28th, 312, he reportedly sees a vision in the sky. He sees a cross, and he sees the message, in this sign you will conquer Well, okay, so he tells his troops, we need to put like a cross on our shields and everything because I've been given this vision and we can win this battle. And they did, and they win. So the next year, he issues something called the Edict of Milan. And of course, he becomes emperor, very powerful. And he does this unusual thing. He basically says, we need to stop persecuting the Christians. And later, it gets even more serious. We're going to make this the official language. The Romans are now in charge. The Roman Empire is incredibly diverse, incredibly spread out. He moves the capital to Constantinople. This is biblical history, and I'm going through it really fast. But it kind of sets the tone for what's written and where it ends up. The new headquarters of the church is in Constantinople, or now Istanbul, and now it's a museum. Of course, it was changed into a Muslim place. But when it's finished, it's an incredibly strong building. So when you see it now, we think of that as a Muslim structure, but it's not. It's a Christian structure. Incredible church. There's the Council of Nicaea. They just get together, 325. They're deciding, okay, what's the real story? And then the Nicene Creed, which we say often, that has to be decided, and somebody has to write it down. Okay, so you've got these different languages, and how are they saved? Well, I'll jump back on one thing. You'll hear different about how history was recorded. History can be written on stone, very heavy to carry it around, and history can be made on a clay tablet. That's a little lightweight, right? But you need something that you can really carry around easy, and that means using something called papyrus, which are reeds that grow in the Middle East, and they lay the reeds on top of one another and kind of make this cross-hatching thing, and they can write on it, and you can actually now carry it around. And this, how do you document history with something you can carry around? Well, it's on these things. This is before paper. And so what you have are things called parchments, and they are stretched skins of animals. The really good ones are called vellum, and they're stretched skin of a calf. And these skins are stretched, they're dried, and then you write on them. And that's how writing occurs, with these skins. Now, papyrus is made from reeds, parchment is made from skins, vellum. And so you have then two different types of writing. One, you have scrolls. Okay, now, and then the new thing is something called a codex, and you've heard these terms, the codex of something. Well, what is a codex? Well, the codex is a book. It's just where you've taken, scrolls are really long, they're like maybe 50 feet long. And if I come up to you and say, well, now what does it say in number 48? Well, I got to roll the whole thing out, and there it is. Well, someone says, well, why don't we just chop these things up and stack them on top of one another? Won't that be easier to get the information? And that's called a codex, and we call it a book. So I'm going to share with you these old things called codex. It's just a book. And I find that fascinating. Most of these, the long scrolls are written on skins, just like parchments, and most of the codex, same thing. So now we have the different languages. But then shows up Latin. Okay, now, so we have a new complication. We got to find somebody to make the translation into Latin. And Jerome is the guy that does it, brilliant person. And he takes all these different languages, all these different, Greek, Aramaic, Hebrew, and everything, and he puts it together, and this new Bible is called the Vulgate. Now that sounds kind of vulgar, but it comes from the word vulgus, which means the common people. Like, let's put this book together. It's the real thing. It's the Old and New Testament, and it's now in Latin. Now this becomes the official, really, and so there it is, the Vulgate. Now, it becomes the official Bible in the world for, particularly Roman Catholics, and it's considered the document, Latin. You got to read, the Bible is in Latin. Then along comes King James Version. There are other versions. There's a version that was written for Muslims, and it's taken I guess the Latin version or one of the versions and changed into Arabic. And remember, Arabic's different than Aramaic. But we end up with now finally an English version, and that's the King James Bible. It's actually translated earlier, but then it becomes the official, and it's an English version now. The average person can read it that reads English. And if you've ever tried to read Latin, the original version, it's very difficult unless you're trained. People in Spain and in Italy and in France and everything, they're trained with their own language. For them to be able to read Latin is very difficult. So this urge to make translations is going on. And, of course, the real strong one is the King James Bible. And so many people consider this the Bible. I mean, probably my ancestors and relatives would argue, the King James Version, that's the correct one. Don't mess with that. Of course, people don't agree with that, and so they say, well, we really need to look at the old documents. Did the translators that did the King James Version, did they get it right? Oh, this is a fun one. It's a Bible written for slaves. And as you can imagine, Exodus is sort of conveniently left out of it. But it's an English Bible for Negro slaves. So where's the oldest? Okay, I'm going to do a countdown. 10, okay, ready? Here we go, 10. 10 oldest Bibles. We start with these groups, and this is per different scholars. I'm going to hustle through this. The Gutenberg Bible, which is, of course, the first really printed Bible, is, that's considered, and it's printed, so now you have different copies. But what's really interesting is these Bibles, individual copies, could be dolled up. They could be made more beautiful. It's the same text and it's the same printing, but someone comes in and colors it. And so you put gold on it. So that's one of the Gutenberg Bibles that's the most valuable of one of the original Bibles because it's all kind of dolled up. You have something called the Codex Gigas. I'm not sure that is. It's an enormous Bible, and some people call it the Devil Bible. It's huge. Again, it's parchment pages. Color picture of it here. You can see how big it is. And we get the Codex Leningrad. Now, this is AD. They think this is around the 1008, and it's a Hebrew, but it's the most complete Hebrew translation. And here's some pictures of it. And it's Hebrew. Obviously, it's the Old Testament, and somebody it's a document of the Hebrew Bible. Then there's one called the Aleppo, and this is 900s. We're going back in time. These books I'm showing you books that are then older and older. It's Hebrew. Codex Aleppo, you can look at the letters, and the lettering's incredible. Of course, it's the Old Testament. Then you get to this one. This is really interesting. This is one that's in Ethiopia, and it's the oldest Christian manuscript that is illuminated with photos. Now, this could be as old as 330 AD. And the interesting thing is, even though it's in Ethiopia, where the average person is not white, right? But the illustrations are of white apostles, Jesus, Paul. Beautiful drawings. Okay, now to the next five. All right, ready? We're going down to the very oldest. Okay. This one I don't know much about, but it's a New and Old Testament, and it's written on parchment. Now, it looks really fuzzy because parchment, you can write on one side and you can flip it over and write on the other side. That's very efficient because when we read a book, it's usually on 2 pages, right? Because that's efficient. So the same thing with parchments, only parchments are really expensive. I mean, this is major dollars for you to get a sheet of parchment. So people are very careful with it, and sometimes they'll write on it, sometimes they erase stuff, and so you end up with something kind of messy like this, but that's what they had. And you could see the problem with text on both sides that are hard to read. This is the New and the Old Testament. Washingtonianus, I think this is actually in Washington, D.C., And this, they're not quite sure on the date of this, but the reason this is is so important is this illustration, and just so that you now have pictures with the Bible. I'm the type of person I never liked books unless they had pictures. You know, for me, the World Book was the most fascinating book that ever came out for me when I was growing up. I hated the Encyclopedia Britannica because it was just mainly text, and the World Book had pictures. So I would have liked this Bible a lot. And it's the most complete New Testament, 700 pages. Yes?
Go back to that picture, if you would. And do you know what's significant about this icon?
You're going to tell me.
So, you know, when Peter goes to Rome, everybody's like, Peter's the rock, the head of the church. And the Eastern church is like, wait a second, Paul was here too. So they're the same size. And it's Peter and Paul, not just Peter and Rome. And I remember the first time I went to Athens and started to kick around with some of the Byzantine. You see Peter and Paul together a lot, but they're the same size to say they're equally as important. Not just the church in the West, but also the church in the East.
And thank you for making that point. It's really important because you know, what's the focus on the story and who really brought us the story. And of course, it's beautifully illustrated, some illustration. And then you get to a story of there's a monastery near Mount Sinai, and it's called St. Catherine's Monastery. And this is a picture of it. It looks like a little fort, and the monks are there and everything, and they're kind of known because they've got a collection of old scrolls and old documents. And this guy, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, he visits the place in the 1840s. This is when Europe is really getting interested into what happened in ancient Egypt and ancient Jerusalem and everything. And so many European scholars from Germany, Russia, France, and England are going to the Middle East, going to the Holy Land, trying to find stuff. They're trying to find old stuff because it's curious and they want to discover it. You know, ultimately, you know, you get Howard Carter discovering King Tut's tomb in 1920, but this is 60 years before. So there's a lot of interest in going there. Of course, it's a hassle to go there. You got to have somebody pay for you to go there. But this one guy gets there and he finds these documents, and these documents become something that's combined over several years to become the Codex. And Guy, can you help me pronounce the word? Okay, let's go with that. I'm not good at pronouncing some words that maybe make a mistake. So this is considered the second oldest Bible. And it has Greek text from the Septuagint and Greek text of the New Testament. It's about 400 pages. The problem is, it's 400 pages on vellum. By the way, that required 360 animals to be killed. We're talking about a lot of animals killed just to make the stretched stuff that you write on, that you could carry around in a book. The problem is different sections ended up at different places. And one section of it ended up in Russia because this guy, I think the Russians, either they helped pay for some of the discovery, whatever. But a big part of the book, this incredible document, ends up in Russia. Well, Stalin needs money, 1933, and he sells it for 100,000 pounds. He sells the Bible. They didn't need the Bible. You know, they don't, this is an atheist country, Soviet Union. So, and so this incredible document, and those letters are about this tall, incredible to look at. This is on display at the British Library, but they're actually sectioned of it at 4 different sections. Well, what happened is in 2009 they all agreed, we got to stop. We got to make a copy. Let's digitize all 4 versions, put them together, and it actually happened. And you can go online now and see the entire book. but the ones that you touch, which are still copies, are not original. They weren't, you know, the original Bible. They are copies. They are copies of copies. But you can see them. Okay, so we get down to the bottom one, the oldest Bible, or it's the oldest codex, and it's in the Vatican Library, and it is an incredible document. It's the Greek text, 759 pages, incredibly beautiful, a lot of beautiful drawings, and this is considered the oldest Bible. What's the oldest fragment of a Bible? Well, the oldest fragment of the New Testament is called P52. And it has been dated to be around AD 125 to 175, in that range. And it is a piece of paper, little piece of paper, that's written on both sides. And it's kept in a place in England. You can go see it. And it actually has part of John 18 on one side and part of John 18 on the other side, you know, just written on this. So it's written, and this is considered the oldest fragment of the New Testament that exists. Even older? What's even older? Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Okay, so now obviously Dead Sea Scrolls are the Old Testament, and this only happened in 1946 to 56, whatever. These are discovered. Freak people out. They're brought into, Jerusalem. They're laid out, tremendous number of scrolls. They end up building a special building in Jerusalem that you can go see. It's called, this is the structure that you go inside, and the Dead Sea Scrolls are on display. Not all of them, but some of them. And it's extraordinary. I have been at that place where the woman is. You look at these things, and the lettering is like this tall. Incredibly straight. I don't know how they did it. I mean, did they have some ruler or something? How did they do that? It's unbelievable to look at them. Now, these are considered, they may be from the 1st century. They're not quite sure. So this is, how old are they? So what's going to happen? Are we going to, that's considered really old, right? Well, a few years ago, they discovered a book that they think may be 1,500 years old, the Gospel of Barnabas. Now, it was kept secret until 2015, and I don't have much information on this. But even further, let's go even further back, and that's because in 2017, there was another cave called the Cave of Horror. I think that's what it's called. And obviously these folks are, in Qumran and this incredibly terrible wilderness where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. They find more Dead Sea Scrolls. And that's announced in 2021. By the way, while they're doing it, they find a basket, and someone carbon dates it and said, this basket is 10,000 years old. And they pull it out and are short. Even older, there's a book that came out a few years ago called Lost Book of Moses. Now, this is the mystery we'll end up with for today, okay? It's a really cool book. Now, the side story I've got to show you is because of this thing, which is a stele, or a stone marker, and it is dated to be around 840 BC. Long time ago, really long time ago, and discovered in 1868. Well, the reason it's important is on this thing is written in Canaanite, Moabite Hebrew. Now, that doesn't sound like anything really important, but it's the first time that the word Yahweh and Israel is mentioned on a item. It mentions Yahweh. It mentions the battle of in fact, it's Moab. Somebody actually conquers part of Israel, and it's written down because people tend to write down their victories, and it's written down. But it's written in a certain type of really, really old Hebrew called Moabite Hebrew. That's important because that exists. They know it's like 800 years old, okay? It's that old. Well, this guy, whose name is Shapira, he's in the Middle East, and this is like in the 1840s or whatever. He gets these 15 leather scrolls. Now, leather is also something people write history on. I've talked to you about parchment, but leather can be the same thing. It's just a rolled up thing of leather. And he gets these 15 scrolls, and he thinks it's the book of Deuteronomy from 900 BC. That was done in 900 BC. He presents it to the British Library, 1878. It's a big deal. He presents it. This is the oldest Bible known. The oldest, it's from 900 BC. 900 years earlier than the Dead Sea Scrolls. But somebody shows up and said, no, it's forgery. And they trash this guy bad in the press. I mean, it's like they make fun of him and everything. And Shapira, he's just heartbroken. And he ends up killing himself. He goes back to Europe. I mean, he basically has given this gift, and the experts come in and say, it's no good, it's a fake. And he kills himself, and it's a heartbreaking story. The reason it's very interesting is the documents on it are published in a newspaper saying how it's very close, but it's a fake. It's a fake. And people have drawn, someone came in, they took photographs of it, and someone came in and actually made a drawing of what was on these things. And here's a picture of it in the British Library. Now, the scrolls vanished because they were fake, right? But in the sketches of these documents, the sketches of them, it's done in Moabite Hebrew, which is the oldest Hebrew, which wasn't used at the time the Dead Sea Scrolls were written. This is the oldest type of Hebrew language, and this document was written in that language, and therefore people now think those leather things may have been real. That may be the oldest Bible ever presented to the British Library. It was declared a fake, it ended up being sold, and it vanished. But this story came out in the New York Times last year and said, whoa, we need to find that. Someone has it. Did someone throw it away, these things? It just got put in a box. It may be discovered one day. If it's discovered, it is 900 years older than the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest Bible ever. Maybe not. 900 BC. Wouldn't it be cool if they discovered it? That could happen. The scrolls vanished. So, in our future, what do we know? Maybe they'll find this. Maybe they'll find older scrolls. Don't really know. And maybe one day someone will discover the real original Bible, the one that was written by, first-hand knowledge, here's who Jesus was, or the first-hand knowledge. The thing about the book, this leather thing is, it could be that Moses actually did write and help write on that leather. It's a possibility. And that's what these scholars are saying. Wouldn't it be wild if we found something, these scrolls, this leather thing that was declared a forgery, but is rediscovered, actually was written by Moses? It's a possibility. Fingers crossed, right? Thank you so much. Now, and I'll come back sometime, maybe, and I've got a couple other presentations. I think I've done these at your church, but I'm not sure because I do these at different times. But I've got one on the Last Supper. It's about the mural, and it's about why it's important and why it wasn't important. The Last Supper mural was, we consider it just incredibly important mural, right? The one in Milan, it wasn't. It was done by Leonardo, and then it was kind of discounted, like, it's just one of a whole lot of Last Supper depictions. It doesn't matter. But it does matter to us now, but it didn't 100 and 200 years ago. So talk about it's been restored. And then the other thing I'll bring back sometimes is what is the Holy Grail, which is the cup of Christ, and tell the story about that. But meanwhile, everybody have a good Sunday, and thank you for being here. Any questions before I let you go? You let me off. Okay. I'm sorry, say it again. Yeah, no, that was the Septuagint. It was King Ptolemy. He was Egyptian, but I mean that was like in that wasn't really like the pharaohs. He was the king in Egypt at the time, but yeah, but he was getting along with the Romans. I think the Romans were really in charge. It's just he's the king locally. It's kind of like Cleopatra was in power in Egypt, but not really. I mean, she was just kind of the one in charge of that area. The Romans were really the big shot. That explain it? Yeah, King Ptolemy. The Ptolemy family is like the very end of the Egyptian empire, from Ramses up to this, and then to Ptolemy and Cleopatra, and then boom, that ends. Any other questions? You guys have a great week. Thank you again. Thank you. Great to see you. Just hope you enjoy this.